And we are back with episode 117 of Count Me In, IMA's podcast about all things affecting the accounting and finance world. Once again, this is your host, Adam Larson, and today's featured guest is John Lemmex. John is Vice President, Chief Financial Officer at Covistro LLC. In that role, he is responsible for all aspects of financial management and controlling. So in this episode, he joined my co-host Mitch Rochon to talk about digital transformation. John shares many personal experiences and great perspective on how finance leaders can play an integral role in transformation projects. So let's head over to the conversation and listen to what he has to say now.
So, John, from what you've seen, how do digital transformation projects typically get started?
Typically in our company, they get started in different parts of the business. It could be something happening within marketing or R&D or even finance. So it tends to be kind of individual. And what our company has done is kind of put together a digitalization group that's global, and they have kind of the skills and the ability to bring it all together. They are operating a data lake, and they have that kind of expertise. So people put projects forward. Sometimes they're run as pilots, and then see if they're scalable globally. And then we implement them, look at them, and then move on from there. So anybody can kind of bring forward a digitalization project.
Now, let's focus mainly on, our listeners here, and we're talking about accounting and finance. So how important is digitalization for finance? Why should these finance leaders really get started on these projects as soon as possible if they haven't done so already?
To me, with digitalization projects, it always comes with efficiency and cost savings, and and there's a business case behind them. So and you can generally, I found most of these cases we've been able to find a business case, been able to save money, gain efficiencies, reduce complexity, and it helps drive the business forward and make finance more efficient. So again, waiting doesn't help drive the business forward. So you need to drive these projects to gain those efficiencies.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. How does the finance team or the finance leader go about building this business case? Who is really the target, or the individuals who are most responsible for pushing this project forward? Who should the finance leader really focus on within these projects?
Well, I think that the finance leader for us is kind of internal, and I'm kind of thinking of a project that we did. It was something internal in the finance area that was causing us pain. We stepped back, we took a look at it, and the answer came using digitalization was using machine learning and robotics was the answer to try to solve the problem. And so then it was the business case was put together, and again it resulted in efficiency through FTE reductions, but it also ended up on a higher accuracy and more accuracy in the financial statements. So on one side there was cost efficiency, other side there was accuracy. And when that case was put together, we piloted it and moved it forward.
Now, you talked about machine learning. Obviously, there's robotics, a lot that goes into these different projects. And for some in finance, that might not be necessarily their first language per se. It might be something that's a little bit outside their comfort zone, or, they need to upskill in that area in order to drive the project forward. So how do you really engage all these stakeholders and really keep the momentum going for these digital transformation projects?
Yeah, the one thing that we've done to try to get people engaged is actually offered kind of a online training in machine learning, in robotics, to get people to start to increase their skill levels, so that they may not become experts in it or be able to run a project, but they understand what the maybe the IT or the data people are going to be asking those kind of questions, and they learn through that how to drive these projects forward, at least understand what goes into them. And it's been there's been quite an uptake rate in our people in trying to do that online learning and develop their skills.
Are there any other obstacles that you've seen? Anything else that may prohibit a digital transformation project from progressing how you anticipated?
I think sometimes it's always we get into resource questions. How much resources do we have, and if a project is simply kind of re-engineering a process and using the software, it's much easier maybe to get those projects forward. When they maybe require, and I'm thinking a supply chain digital project. Those require maybe capital investment using barcode readers, scanners, infrastructure upgrades, and then it becomes more difficult to find those resources and drive them forward. So less capital investment seems easier to drive the projects forward. More capital investment, a little more difficult. But again, too, is how many projects do you have going? I think sometimes you get into project overload, and there's just you have to prioritize and get where the biggest bang for your buck.
That was actually going to be kind of my next question. And obviously, there are many areas of the business where you could look for, digital improvements. And I'm sure, like you just said, many different projects going on all at once. Have you ever come across a case where a project just didn't pan out? The digital transformation just never happened for one reason or another. Can you speak to that a little bit and what the company did in order to respond?
We have one project in our end-to-end supply chain where we feel like we could really upgrade our ability to track materials, move materials. If we try to compare ourselves, say, to an Amazon, we fall very far behind. I kind of think of them as the leader when it comes to digitization in supply chain. We had a project, we wanted to move it forward, but it stumbled on capex, and some of it was business downturn. Other parts was then entering the pandemic. But I wouldn't say the projects are dead, but more shelved until they business environment changes. I think if there's a good business case, and then you get into a resource issue, it may not move as quickly as you might want it and get those returns, but you shelve it and continue to push on at a later date.
That's a good point. And, prioritizing, like you said earlier, um, with so many different things going on and so many functions of the organization being involved in these projects, while it may enhance the efficiency, let's say, of finance, obviously you're going to rely on IT and other departments. So, how important is the communication across the organization with these different projects going on? And really, what is that communication path? How do you typically, speak with and listen to other departments while these projects are going on?
Um, Absolutely. The communication is key in all these projects, and how to prioritize. And we have we call it a digital governance board. So all projects have to go through this digital governance board and be prioritized. And that's whether it's a finance project, supply chain, innovation project. They all go through this digital governance board. In fact, our digital governance board is actually chaired by our CEO. That's how important it is to us. And I think he acknowledges that he wants to drive digitalization, but the other time we have limited resources. So this board engages in the prioritization of the projects moving forward.
So it might be the same answer that you just shared, but when it comes to communicating and working cross-functionally, putting these projects out there, how do you ensure that what you're doing really aligns with the core values or the overall business strategy? I'm sure the governance board here that you mentioned has a lot to do with that, but how do you really make sure that what you're proposing and actually doing aligns with the business strategy?
I think, yeah, I think you hit on it, that the this digital governance board, there's always a question when presenting, how does it fit into the strategy? What is the strategy? And sometimes it's if it's cross functional, it's a little more clear how it fits into the strategy. And then other times you can have a simple digitalization, maybe that doesn't have to go through the board because it's such a simple project, that there's just gains from it, but doesn't take so many resources that you can just drive it forward because it might make sense within the finance area.
And whether you're driving it forward or working with all these different departments, governance, What's the typical time frame? Some people who might not be so familiar with these projects or are interested in starting for the first time, obviously you want to get it done. You're very results oriented and gaining those efficiencies. But what's a realistic time frame for some of these projects?
Yeah, I think sometimes when it gets involved into machine learning and into robotics, I think they take a little longer than people might think. Our first foray into that, it took a lot longer than we expected. I mean, we got the gains we expected, and the benefits and the quality we expected. It just took a little longer than I would have liked to get there. So I think you have to learn from that. And okay, how do you drive the process faster going forward? In other cases, with respect to digitalization, we've been able to make very quick gains within, seeing results within months. That not necessarily with machine learning or that, a different type of digitization. And with that, I kind of refer to here during the pandemic, or kind of just actually prior to the pandemic, we realized we were printing checks. We still print checks. We put them in an envelope and we put them a stamp on it and we mail it. And some of the vendors are electronic. We said, well, why can't we go to 100% electronic? It's really just changing the vendors. And again, you have some leverage with your vendors. So we went from printing 3,000 checks a month, and we're now printing 50 or 60 checks a month. But when we started that project, we started to see very quick returns because we didn't have to involve many departments. It was kind of an internal finance type thing, working with vendors to do that. But by the time we got into the pandemic, we were no longer worrying about printing checks, putting them in envelopes, and mailing them to customers. Again, for me, that's kind of a digitalization, taking something that was coming out of the computer and into paper and moving to complete electronic transfer, and we gained a lot of benefits from it.
So that's an example that probably has a much longer return also. But I'm kind of thinking just digital transformation projects in general. What's the typical shelf life? And what I mean by that is when you complete a project and you recognize these efficiencies, when is it that you then again have to kind of revisit that project or that area of the business and see if it can be improved even further? How do you really prioritize what needs to be done new and what needs to be done again?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think technology keeps changing, and I've seen it through my career. What we thought was leading edge technology 5 years ago today is not leading edge technology. I think sometimes report delivery, doing automated online report delivery through reporting factories, those types of things. What's cutting edge in one time quickly gets quickly becomes no longer cutting edge, and you have to go back and say, okay, do we change the technology? What's the cost to change the technology, and what are the benefits to change the technology? So I think some things can have a lot, shelf life of up to 5 years. Others might be shorter. I even go up to looking at SAP. You put an SAP system in, and all of a sudden, 8, 9, 10 years later, you're looking at redoing it all over again as the technology keeps changing. Those are a little bit longer shelf life, I would say, like an ERP system, but still, your ERP system eventually becomes outdated, and you have to reevaluate and move on, and with them.
Absolutely. I think it really, lends itself to the fact that finance, particularly, and really just organizations in general, need to stay agile, right? They need to be nimble and flexible and adapt to everything that's going on. Obviously, it's really hard to predict, and nobody has this crystal ball. But I like to give our guests, an opportunity to kind of share their perspective. If you could look into the future a little bit, what kind of predictions do you have as far as what might be coming down the road for finance, and how might digital play even more of a role, and whether it's a certain aspect of the day to day or bigger projects that you look to implement? How do you see the function changing even further in the future?
Yeah, I think as in the future, things like SAP HANA, as those types of things change, and what it does, the information that it starts to create within your system, and then how even finance, closes the books, does things, implements new legal entities. That entire package, I think, is going to continue to change as the technology changes. Even the fact now that we're no longer sitting on assets and server farms anymore, it's going to the cloud. So so how SAP works and how your ERP system works in the cloud, how people interact with it and work with it, I think will, those things, whether it's Oracle or SAP or others, how that finance function works and how things are integrated with them, I think is going to continue to change and move forward. I think I already touched on a little bit end-to-end supply chain. I think, it's, the Amazons and, those types of companies are, really good at that end-to-end supply chain. I think we're going to see it, those same applications in chemical companies. Obviously it's big in retail, but I think you're going to start to see it in business to business as it goes on. I think, I'm no expert on Bitcoin and blockchain technology. I think we're going to start to see with blockchain technology how companies transact with each other is going to start to change, and again, we'll see the disappearance of sending checks, receiving checks. Those transactions become much more real time, and I think it starts to change how you run your business. Liquidity planning changes when things become instantaneous. And it just it changes the finance people how they look at it and how they measure their business.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.